And as we record this, we are currently driving west. We're driving west towards Milan out of the Dolomites after traveling around Italy for 2 weeks. So we want to share a little bit about what we've been doing and maybe answer some questions that people ask.
So basically, this trip came about because it has been Neely's dream to come here, and I guess she was holding out for something specific, and then she was tired of waiting, and one day she was passing through town, and she came over, and she was telling me about how she wanted to do this trip, and she asked me if I would want to go with her. And at first, I was like, whoa, this is crazy, because it felt like such an honor to be asked to go. And so then I thought about it a little bit, and she told me how much it would cost, and I was like, okay, this is going to teach me how to better save money.
And also, I don't know if you remember this, but we didn't know for sure where we were going to go originally. We just knew it was going to be somewhere in Patagonia.
Yeah, somewhere in Europe.
Yes, or Patagonia, which is in South America. Those were just like the next big places. And so I was looking at plane tickets and doing some comparing and contrasting for the time of year that we knew we could go, which was June, which is a complicated time of year to travel to mountains, but we can explain that later. But yeah, and so Patagonia and I think even Iceland I looked at a little bit. I don't know if you... Switzerland, and then finally Italy just seemed like the most approachable place, and so that is where we decided to go. See if I could give a recap in like one go. This is what months of research does for you. I pretty much memorize it. But okay, so we flew into Milan and we took a series of trains down to an area of the coast called Cinque Terre, which we'll talk about. It's these 5 little towns, and they're connected by a trail system and also a train system. And if you've ever seen the movie Luca, that is what inspired that movie, was Cinque Terre. And it's just little fishermen villages, and there are these little bright colorful houses, and they sit up on top of each other. And so we took our train down to the most northern of the cities, and then we hiked or took train. It depended on the day. We would travel from one city to the next, and yeah, so we visited all 5 over the course of maybe 3 days, and that was the first section of our trip. And then when we reached the bottom city, the most southern point, we picked up a rental car and drove then 5 hours north into the Dolomites. And the Dolomites it's basically part of the Alps. So it's part of the Italian Alps. They're very high mountains. They're limestone. They're stunning and beautiful and really famous. And so we spent the last half of our trip backpacking in the Dolomites and doing some day hikes, doing some backpacking to things called refugios, which are little like family-owned bed and breakfasts up in the mountains, and the only way you can access some of them is by hiking. And so we backpacked from point to point. And then now we are finishing the trip by driving back west towards Milan, which is where we flew into. And this part of the trip is spontaneous. You would consider it spontaneous, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah.
And spontaneous in the sense that we didn't know we were going to do this until maybe 2 days ago, or maybe even yesterday. We left the end of the trip open to hear from locals that we met along the way what we should do. And Lake Garda is something that came up a couple times. And since it's on the way to Milan, we just decided we would head that way. So we're going to spend the last couple of days doing that. And what else are we going to do, Jess?
We're going to go to Switzerland!
We have time to drive up to Switzerland, and we have unlimited miles on our car. So we're just gonna do it. We're gonna do the thing. So that is an overview of what the trip has been, kind of at a 50,000 foot view before zooming in on the details.
So during this whole trip, there's always a pilot and a co-pilot, and I am the co-pilot, or passenger princess, but mainly co-pilot. I'm like kind of our culture girl, the language, and finding awesome food and stuff like that. That was my forte.
Yes, for sure. And without you doing the language, I would be at a loss. I just always wander around just saying, I only speak English. I don't even know how to say I don't speak Italian. So without your language, that would be a problem. And then, of course, my strengths are the planning. I spent months and months planning this trip. And then driving, I am the driver. And fun fact, in Italy you have to have an international driver's permit, which is very easy to get, but you do have to be over 25, so sorry Jess, you cannot drive while we are here. But I don't know, what else am I? The planner, the navigator in the trails and the maps and making sure we don't get lost and memorizing.
I only helped you a little bit that first day.
Yeah, and just making sure to double check and triple check all of my choices at forks in the trail and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, whenever you travel with somebody, you all have strengths. You all, like, I needed somebody who cared about food and language, and you needed somebody that made sure we didn't get lost and stayed on track with our timing. So, a big question people have, whether they ask it or not, that I had is, how can you even afford that? Like, going to Europe or traveling anywhere feels really daunting to afford. And in full transparency, the goal of this trip was for it to cost around $3,000 in trip expenses. So that includes flight, that includes accommodations, that includes excursions and food, and those are kind of the big categories, and car rental. And I think what it does not take into account is the expense of if you don't have the appropriate gear. For us, that was important. We needed certain things for some of the hiking we were doing. But if you have everything you need, doing a trip just like what we did could be managed at $3,000. I think that each of us probably spent a little bit more than that because we wanted to indulge a little bit more, and we're able to because some of the saving we did, but that's just realistically what it costs. I'd say some tips that I have, and then maybe Jess, you can share some of yours, is how to save money for that would be, first of all, to consider that you don't pay for all of it up front if you're planning it yourself. So we paid for the ticket 4 or 5 months ago, so it's on a different kind of budget circuit. You know, I paid for, it's like past Neely paid for the ticket, and then present Neely paid for the food, and so the budgeting doesn't hit your bank account $3,000 hard. It comes out in little pieces, so that in itself is helpful. But then I think looking ahead and just giving yourself a hard amount to save each month is very helpful. Something I do is I don't spend any cash that comes through my hands. I just put it all away into like a literal envelope in my bedroom. So if anyone ever gives me cash for a birthday present or paying me back for something or paying me for a task, or I find it on the street, I just save all my cash. So that was very helpful for me, and that's like my number one tip. And then I think doing little side hustles is never a bad idea. But would you add anything for what helped you save money? And you haven't even been out of college that long. So I'm 30. The way that I budget is differently than how you would at 24. But how did you save for $3,000?
So one thing that was definitely helpful was the cash thing that you mentioned, because whenever you first said it, I was like, I don't really have that much cash, so I don't think that that's really going to help, but I guess we'll try it because I trust you, and you've been doing this longer than me. So I did it, and I ended up saving like $300 to $400, which was very shocking to me because I literally never have cash ever. But when I would get the random money that people would give me for gas or blah blah whatever, I would just put it away, and it ended up being way more than I thought that it would. So that was pretty awesome. And then if I ever had different moments where I was like, ooh, I could buy this thing, or I could go do this fun thing, I would just think to myself and be like, do I want to do this now, or should I just save this for when I go to Italy later? I can do this thing for myself in Italy, or I can buy that thing in Italy later. So I just kept telling myself that, and then reminding myself that it will be worth it to not do something now so that I can do something cooler in Italy later.
Yes, and I love what you said about how you had some debt built up, but that it helped motivate you, to pay off the debt. It didn't hinder you. It, motivated something really good.
Yes, so I'm very, extrinsically motivated. So, TBH, the whole finance department is not my strong suit. But when Neely said that she wanted to go on this fun trip, but she didn't want to be a bad influence on me, and me, be spending money that I didn't have, or spending money when I should be saving it or whatever, I was like, oh, okay. So I had already been working on handling my finances better. Not that I ever was super bad with it. I never accumulated a ton of debt or anything like that.
It takes practice, though.
Yeah, it definitely takes practice and just learning how to be super wise with it, And so I actually, in the process of this past year, I paid off the rest of my debt from different things, and also saved money to go to Italy. And so that was pretty cool.
And then you get to come here and do some things have an extra little meal rather than cutting that corner because you did a good job budgeting. But yeah, also I consider Venmo cash as well. I don't know if I ever told you that, but because technically, even through the government, they view Venmo as cash. And so whenever I have somebody pay me back for a meal I pick up or something, I just am going to always assume that if I'm paying for somebody's meal or if I'm paying for something, it's coming out of, it's like cash. So I don't spend my Venmo. I just dump all that into my savings basically as well for trips. And that money saves up really fast.
Yeah, it
and
does.
So that is like the biggest tip. But so I think it is affordable. We will talk about it a little bit later. You could do this trip substantially more expensive.
Or a little bit cheaper too.
Yes, you could do it cheaper. Something unique about Europe, at least for Italy, is that a lot of the expenses are individual. So it's not like the more people you add to the trip, the cheaper it gets. So for us to have only 2 people on this trip, it really wouldn't have been that much cheaper to have 4 people or 10 people because of the way that we booked everything. So that's just kind of how it works in Europe. And we cut a lot of corners to make it cheaper. For example, we did some camping. So we camped on the hard ground, 3 or 4 nights, and we stayed in a random hostel that was so sketchy to get to, and we've stayed in Airbnbs that we've booked last minute, and we've stayed in 10 different. By the end of this, we'll be in at least 10 different places. So it's like every night we're moving, and so this type of trip isn't for everyone. But if you're willing to pay more, you can have it much more luxurious. And so I was telling Jess on the way in that not just anyone could do a trip like this because you have to be uncomfortable. And whenever our very first travel day, we had, it was like 24 hours of traveling, and it's grueling because you're like on a plane, and then you're on another plane, and then you're on a train, and it's a different language in a different country, and then you're on another train, and then our last train, we're up for 24 hours at this point. And then it's delayed, and it's delayed, and it's delayed. And we are just we're like 30 minutes from our final destination, and we can't get to it by car. And then just a little bit further by train, and our trains are delayed. And so I told her, I said, man, this would be the place where I would lose somebody that was on a trip like this. They would become miserable because you're tired and you have to get through that misery. So then we made it through that. And then we get to our, one of our accommodations, and we have to hike up a mountain after, carrying our bags across the cities. I'm like, okay, if I didn't lose them on the train, I'd lose them in this in this weird hostel. And it was like, what was sketchy about the hostel?
It was like, the hostel was like Italy meets India meets your grandmother.
Oh my gosh, and to get to it, first of all, we had to enter, this is a rabbit trail, but we had to enter into like an unmarked storefront building to get the key. And then we followed this Italian man back up into the mountains of this city, and there was like this hidden elevator in the mountains, and there's like a bouncer at the elevator door.
Yes.
It was just a weird experience. And so if I didn't lose them on the train, they'd become miserable in that moment, and they'd probably become a little scared, but it ended up being awesome. It was a really great place to stay.
And we had the whole room to ourselves both nights, even though we didn't book it private.
Yeah.
And we had a balcony.
Yeah, so it worked out, but then what was the next miserable thing? That was okay, if we didn't lose them in the hostel and we didn't lose them in the train, we'd lose them here. Oh, the snow. The snow. So then we went on a backpacking trip to the Refugios, and there were no reviews of this trail yet because it was too early in the season. And
we went up the very first night that this Refugio is open. So the very first day that it opens in the season of it not being snowy anymore, that's when we go.
Yeah, and it's already kind of a difficult Refugio to get to because it's very high altitude, and it's backcountry, and within just a couple hundred meters, I don't know, half a mile, I'm speaking in metric now, there was snow, and then it got worse and worse, and the visibility because of a cloud and fog was maybe 3 feet sometimes, and then up to maybe 6 feet. So you're trekking through feet of snow in clouds and fog, and we've never been here, and it was just the sketchiest hike. And I thought, okay, if I didn't lose them on the train delay and I didn't lose them on this weird hostel, they'd definitely be tapping out at the snow hike. And but it always has paid off. But I say all that to say, a trip like this, it's beautiful and incredible, but it's type 2 fun for sure.
Yes.
You have to know, almost in the moment of the misery, you have to know that it's going to be worth it, and that every issue has a solution. and it might cost a little bit, it might be a little uncomfortable, but even in the snow, we were looking at caves. Like, we'll sleep in the cave if we have to. Like, if we can't make it, at least we can find shelter. And so, like, that's type 2 fun, and now it's like the best memory ever. We're like, wow, we did that. I can't believe that we did it. But type 2 fun is misery in the moment, but looking back fondly at a memory. And that's the kind of fun that backpackers and elite athletes, not saying we're elite athletes, but that's the kind of thing they have to tap, like, I mean, after this trip. But, you know, cyclists and trail runners and mountain climbers, and that's all type 2 fun. And so this type of trip maybe isn't for everybody, but I think you can get something from it, even if you're going to have a luxury trip. Because we did luxury a little bit. I wish you could see Jess's glasses right now. They're luxury. They're fancy. They're fun. We can do luxury, but we did more type 2 fun. So just keep that in mind.
So moving on from the money aspect of it, we didn't really go to any of the major cities in Italy. And that was kind of fun for me because I'm not really the kind of person that likes to go to the tourist hotspot locations. I didn't really care to go to Venice. I didn't really care to see the Colosseum or the Leaning Tower of Pisa because I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it looks exactly the same as it does in pictures. And so I didn't really desire to go to those places. So then when we found like the random coastal town of Cinque Terre, and when I saw the pictures of the Dolomites, I was like, yes, let's go there. I don't care about the other places. And that was super fun. And even though they're not like the hot spot destinations for people to go, there's still a lot of tourism there. Like, Cinque Terre, we looked it up, and like the actual population of people who live there was like 3,000 or 4,000, but they have like 3 times that amount in people who come just to visit. So there were even a lot of people from Italy that go to these places to vacation.
Yeah.
So the majority of the people in the areas that we went to were tourists, whether they were tourists from Italy or tourists from Germany or Austria or the UK. We ran into very few Americans.
That's true.
So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I've been to Europe a couple of times, and so that was something when I talked with you at the beginning of the trip was like, hey, I'm not looking to go back to Rome. I couldn't care less about these other places. I'm not a history buff, which I know is sad because Europe is incredible in history, but and so she was good with that, and so it was always the plan to stay out of those areas, but to stay in areas that are touristy enough to be safe. But to be honest, I mean, we'll talk about safety, but I felt safer in these little no-name cities than I did in Rome and other big cities that I've been in. So it felt really nice, and whenever we spoke with people, it just felt like we could sit and talk with them. Like nobody, you know, everyone was minding their own business, but nobody really was in a rush to be anywhere. We were all kind of having the same local experience, and we did joke that even though we were in smaller towns, with the joke consistently was like, where are the Italians?
Where are the Italians?
Because it was so hard to know who were locals, because there is such a culture of tourism in these places, and it's what sustains their economy, so it's great. But it's like, where are they? But we did finally start to see some. Like, we had
after we left Cinque Terre.
Yeah, I mean, I took a couple photos of people that I would imagine are locals, but we didn't talk with any locals in that part of the country because, yeah, but whenever we were in the Dolomites, we did have some fun experiences with locals. You want to tell them about the one with the restaurant? Go on.
So basically, what our normal rhythm was like up to this point was we would do something fun or something hard outside, then we would come back to wherever we were staying and we would change and we would look cutesy and then we'd go out to eat. But then this was our first day out more so in the wilderness, and we just got done hiking.
10 and a half miles.
Right. But we thought it was like 3 at the time. And so then we get done with this hike, and then we try to find a place to eat. And then I have been the person who has been finding our spots to eat. And online, it just showed pictures of the outdoor seating. And so we were just all dressed in our hiking gear. And so I was like, okay, this place is more our vibe. We're going to go here.
We were muddy. I was wearing socks with sandals. I mean, we were crusty from this hike. And so sitting outside felt pretty necessary. It was important.
Yes. So then we arrive, and the restaurant is in a hotel. And then we walk in, and the person is only speaking in Italian to us. He went and got someone who could speak English. Then they went to seat us, and they're not seating us outside like I thought we were going to. We are inside, and we are in a hoity-toity restaurant in our hiking clothes. Fine dining. And then we sit down, and the two guys beside us are actually Italians who own different shops in the local square. And so I was like, we've been looking for the Italians. So then we end up becoming friends. We're talking during dinner or whatever. Also, best food that we ate. I mean, probably not the entire trip, but it was number 2.
I mean,
it was really good.
I didn't like it at first because it was the kind of restaurant that has like multiple courses, and every course is like a little tiny bite. Like, I'm just not a foodie like that, and so I already was uncomfortable. And they're like, it's like fancy, and they brought the checkout in like a velvet box, and we're dressed the first night of the trip that we're not dressed nice, and we're sitting in this place, and it turns out that the guy who by accident, the guy who met us at the door that didn't speak English, he was asking if we had a reservation. So it's like this fancy reservation restaurant. They seated us anyways, but the guys next to us were giving us a hard time.
Yes, but it was really funny because then at the end of it, we're just talking and we're chatting and we're talking about where we're going and asking them questions about the place and their lives and all that stuff. And then at the end, he looks over at Neely and he points to her feet and he gasps and he says, are you wearing thongs and socks? He was like, are you serious right now? He was like, oh my gosh, Italians could never. But it's okay because you're a tourist.
Yes, he was giving me the hardest time. And then he pulls his phone out. He said, let me take a photo.
He said, can I take a picture?
So he's taking a photo of my socks and sandals. I'm just crumpling up inside because I just didn't
She's
expect
like whispering threats to me.
Yes, I was
while
threatening Jess because she was single-handedly responsible for choosing this restaurant. And we weren't smart enough to just turn around and walk away. Like, we were just in it. We just thought, we don't know what's happening, so I guess we'll just keep going until someone tells us to leave. And but the food was really good. But that's sort of what it looks like to find. And I think chasing the food is kind of what took us further into the local life, because to get out of the tourism, you have to kind of leave the main areas, and you have to go higher or go deeper or further into a place, and that's usually where the tourism stops, because they have to run back and catch a bus or a train, or they have somewhere they have to be, or things like that. And then also having a car was a big difference maker in our local experience, because we could just drive wherever we wanted, and we could come to places after the bus system stopped running to see it without a bunch of people. And then going deep into the mountains to the refugios, we met quite a few people that were from the area, because it's difficult to get those accommodations and those reservations, and the locals kind of have first pick of that. So I don't know, all those things combined, you just have to be willing to go deeper into the cities, drive yourself, be willing to talk to people, and not look like you're just looking for the next souvenir shop, because I think that's what gives it away to locals. They're like, oh, this is just another tourist with their eyes glued up to their phone, or glued, like not paying attention. But we were there to meet people and to be part of the experience culturally, right? Does that make sense?
You should share about your how you have become more flexible in your spontaneity, specifically with housing, lodging stuff, and how did we do that in a small town?
Yes, so we were in pretty much exclusively small towns. Luckily, one thing to consider is we were here during what's called shoulder season, and that is in between seasons. So it's not winter, during their low season is what they would call it, for both Cinque Terre and the Dolomites. That's usually when it's cold, tourists aren't there, a lot of shops aren't open, and it's not during the high season, which is starting actually next week, where it's like a lot of tourism, everything is open, the snow is melted, the ocean is warm enough to swim in. So we were there during the medium season, shoulder season. That made finding accommodations easier but I also am just growing in my spontaneity. So some of the places I booked far, far in advance, the places that were like really high demand. So like the Refugio, I booked in January, and we're in June. But then we had an Airbnb that we're literally driving to today that I booked yesterday. And so to find places in small towns, I think just being willing to be in the place before you start looking. So the Airbnbs that I've booked since being here, I couldn't have seen from the States. Like, it just wasn't going to pick up that location accurately. But they're very cheap, like affordable, achievable. And we had to just be in the right area of the world for the location to be accurate, to pick up accommodations that were available in our, like, financial range. Yeah, I think all of that. And I really enjoyed this trip that I left a few nights specifically not booked for accommodation, because I wanted to try and see if it was possible to book something as we go. For example, that's why we're going to a new area of northern Italy right now, because it wasn't booked. We weren't locked into anything, so we could spontaneously go to another small town that a local recommended to us. But if I had booked something in advance, I wouldn't have known to do that. And I wouldn't have had time to talk to a local that said, oh yeah, this lake is nice, you should go stay here, or this accommodation is nice, you should try it.
Yeah, and that's what's good about, like, being flexible and not afraid whenever you're traveling, is because then you don't have to plan things to a T. When you plan things to a T, by the hour, by the day, all of those things before you get there, you're not from there. And there's so much that you're going to realize is there when you get there that you didn't know and you couldn't find in your research before you left. So if you're willing to be flexible, or like for us specifically, because we don't mind hard things, we're like, well, if we can't find a place to stay, we'll just camp in our car and it'll be fine.
That's why I booked the car, was because I was like, hey, if we can't find, I'm making a decision, I'm taking a risk to find a place spontaneously. If that doesn't happen, we have to have a backup plan. It might be more expensive than we were expecting, or it might be uncomfortable, but it's a plan, like,
yeah,
we might have to spend $400 for a bougie hotel that has availability, but at least there's always a solution.
right.
And that's coming from a recovering, like, anxious traveler. Like, my nature isn't actually to be spontaneous. My nature is to be planned, but this is growth. This is the way, though. So I can say, from being somebody who's experienced it both ways, trying it this way within reason. I think you could not do this in peak season. You would just be really struggling the whole time. But if you can research a place you're going and figure out what the peak season and what the low season is and try to plan it accordingly, or just go outside on the outskirts of the city. We stayed in one place, our like random Airbnb we booked. It was in this cute little town, but it was just outside of the main areas.
We don't even remember what it's called.
Couldn't tell you.
We couldn't figure out what it was called.
Couldn't tell you the name of the town. Couldn't tell you anything about it, but they definitely didn't speak English, and they definitely looked at us like we were crazy because they don't have a lot of Americans or like tourists in that area. And we never would have known that if we hadn't come here, because I was studying the map. But memorizing a map is different than being in the place. You just know so much more, like you said a second ago. And so, yeah, that's kind of how you find the small towns, is a little bit of that spontaneity.
Oh, and also, we had somebody ask, what are things to know to not stand out as a tourist? And to you, I would say, just remember that you are, in fact, a tourist.
It's true.
It's true. Like,
I'm not Italian.
Yeah, I'm definitely the kind of person that I'm like, I don't want us to go like a sore thumb. That's why I brought so many clothes. Because one, I like being cute, and two, I didn't want to just, look like an American only wearing athletic things. But I think that you just got to remember that you are a tourist. You are not from the area that you are visiting, and that is okay. People love that people come from far away to experience their culture and visit their things and go to their homes. People love that. So just know that you are a tourist, but you don't have to be a rude tourist, and you don't have to be a tourist that doesn't actually care about the place or the people that you're going to be around. And so I think that it's funny. I think that you can tell a lot about where a person is from by what they're wearing. So if you really want to look like a local, I guess you can do a lot of like research on their fashion and what kinds of things that they wear and what brands and stuff like that if you really want to, but that's going to cause you some monies because people in other countries don't always wear the brands that you wear or the colors that you wear. But it became like a fun game for me. I would like look at what someone is wearing and like low-key judge them by it.
Yes.
Not in a harsh way, but just in like okay, by what you're wearing, I think that you're from this part of the world. And then I would get close enough to them to hear what language they were speaking in. And normally I would be right.
Every time it felt like.
Yeah, so that was fun.
Yeah.
So I think you just got to remember that you are a tourist and that's not a bad thing. And also, like we said before, a lot of these places that you're going to want to see, almost everyone that is there is going to be some sort of tourist, whether it's they're from a different part of that country visiting that place or from a different country.
Yeah. And I think something fun, one of the interactions we had with the local was the guy who took photos of my feet and thought that was so entertaining. He was giving us a hard time because like, oh, all the tourists come in here and they just come for this one photo on this one mountain for one day. And we had gone to that mountain that day, but we did the whole loop. We hiked, and I mean, that viewpoint that everyone takes photos of, that everyone in Italy, like in that part of Italy, knows that that's why people are there. Like, that was the least exciting part of the whole day for us.
Right.
And we spent the whole day exploring everything, and whenever we told him that, we're like, yeah, I mean, we saw it, but we didn't stay there, and that's not why we came. He kind of lit up. Like, they just have assumptions about tourists just like we have assumptions about them. But we all desire to connect. And so once you spend enough time and you don't rush off or rush past somebody and you're not a rude tourist, like, they like that you're from another part of the world. They want to know something about your life too. And I was speaking with one of them, and they said that they love whenever English-speaking people visit, because then they get to practice their English. And why would I want to pretend I'm Italian or pretend I'm not from there when I could offer culture to be, like, bartered and, like, traded with another culture? I think that's part of it.
Yeah, and I think another thing, too, if you're scared about going somewhere because you don't know the language, is that at least here in Italy, and probably for a lot of Europe, and just a lot of the world, a lot of people speak English now. Like,
Yes.
It's a big deal. And it's not just because of America. Like, also, there's the whole UK. Like, literally,
Yes.
like, English. Australia. Like, there's just so many places that speak English. And so, a lot of people, especially younger people, will normally also speak English. A lot of the places that we've gone to, if we just kind of look at them strangely when they speak to us in Italian or German,
Or laugh nervously.
or just laugh nervously, then we start speaking in English, then they also start speaking in English to us. Honestly, I thought that my Spanish was going to get us by in Italy, and I've met way more people who speak English than speak Spanish. Only like one person.
Yeah. Well, the Spanish was helpful because it's the same root as Italian.
Yeah.
So that was helpful to read Italian, but when they speak, you can barely understand what they're saying because it's so fast. But they pretty much, and it's always embarrassing but realistic, that they will start, you hear them switch to English before you even say anything.
Yes.
Because they can, I don't know what it
Because
is.
it's our clothes. They can tell that we're tourists by what we're
Yes.
wearing.
And I think that English is like the best bet. Like, if they're going to guess on any language, English is a good language to guess. Because even if it's someone from France and they're from, they're in Italy, they're going to be able to speak together in English. So anyways, it's just part of it. English is just a universal kind of language, or pretty close to it. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're just blessed that we speak English.
Okay, so going back to how the Italian guy that we met was talking about how most of the time people go to their little town and just go to this one mountain and take this one picture. They like went with a cable car or whatever. Something that's good to remember when you're going to a place is like you can start off with the like iconic, super famous things that you find on Instagram, but make sure that you don't pack your day full enough with just those things that you can't experience them fully. Like there were multiple times when we went to a place for a specific thing that we found on Instagram or whatever that was famous, but then when we got there, that wasn't even the coolest part of it. But because we allotted ourselves extra time, then we were able to like fully experience it. Like, not just take a cable car up there, but like hike the whole thing, or not just see it from this one perspective, but then also go to the town that it was close to and like shop around there, those kinds of things. So just giving yourself time to experience something fully and not just the highlights of it.
And what helps with that as, again, someone who's done it both ways, I used to plan it minute by minute. Like, I would have the day planned to a T because I was anxious and because it felt like a sense of control. Like, I know when we're going to wake up, and I know where we're going to go to eat, and then how far it's going to be to walk to this next place. But what I found is much more helpful to engage in it just as a local is you have one thing planned for the day. Like, this is it. This is the one thing that if we do nothing else, this one thing is enough. And then you let the rest of the day just kind of take you wherever it does. So, like, okay, we're on our way to our one thing, but we have time to stop at this little cafe we found in this back street. Or, like, okay, we finished this thing, but now we have time to drive the long way home. And, oh my gosh, on our way home we found this other thing. And so choosing to do one thing a day, and honestly, it caused us to have to chop some famous things. Like, there's this really famous meadow that we initially had planned to do with multiple other things in a day, and we just counted the cost and decided it was more worth it to take our time and kind of enjoy where we were, and instead of rushing to this next famous thing. So we'll just only have internet photos of that place because we never made it, but it was worth it because we got that interesting restaurant experience with the Italian and the bougie 5-course meal and all of that. And if we had rushed, we never would have had that experience. So one thing a day is like the best possible planning, in my opinion. One more thing before we talk about something different. Packing is a big question. Like, how in the world do you travel, and how do you pack? How do you know what to pack? And I think that vlogs can help you, but some things that were helpful for us, I guess we can chat through a little bit. What made our trip unique was that we had 2 very different climates. I would say more than that. We had like 3 different climates because we had coastal, so it was warm, not that warm, but like, shorts and a t-shirt. And then we had mountains, so we had, a little mid-layer and long pants. And then we had snow, which is like, your snow jacket and gloves and stuff like that. So it was a unique challenge, and we did it all in just a backpack.
If you have never done this before, one, you should get packing cubes.
Packing cubes!
Because that's going to be super helpful for you to stay organized, and then you can know okay, this is my outfits that are cute, these are my outfits that are casual, and just grab them, open them, whatever. Makes it a lot easier. And then also, as you're packing, if you're the kind of person who's an overpacker and wants to look cute and wants to bring all of the things,
tell him, Jess.
Because me too. Even though I can be super granola and go 5 days without showering,
as we are at this exact moment.
Currently, we have not showered in a while. I still want to look cute when we go out to these places, especially traveling with Neely as a photographer, because she'd be out here taking pics of me every 5 seconds, and I gotta be looking good, okay? And so here's what I did. I laid out all the clothes that I was like, okay, these would be cute to bring. Then, if one of those items of clothing could not be used for at least 2 or more outfits, in conjunction with other stuff that I had, then it would go back in the closet. I'm not going to bring it. And so all of the things that I brought could be worn multiple times in multiple ways with different kinds of outfits. So what I brought could probably give me at least 5 cute outfits, maybe more if I mix the stuff around. But I ended up not wearing at least one of the outfits, but I have no regrets. So is my bag 5 to 8 pounds heavier than Neely's? Yes. Because I also, we had a bunch of different types of weather that we had to account for, and then I also wanted to look cute, but I have no regrets. So really, when it comes to packing, you just have to choose. What is it going to be worth it to you? If you don't want to have a heavier bag, then you just need to be more minimal. And you also have to know that you can do a lot of different kinds of outfits with just a few staple pieces and just mix it around. You don't have to bring a different pair of pants and a different pair of shirt all the time. You just got to get creative. And that's how you know when you're a true fashionista, is when you can make a